And actually, I just read this morning that there was another report by Stanford economist Thomas D. He revealed that over 1.2 million students left district schools. And that exodus was sustained throughout the 21-22 school year. And families continued to opt for private schools. That rose 4%. But get this, homeschooling up 30%, even though most district schools reopened. So my question is, do you think this trend will continue? Why or why not?
Personally, I've been, is this on?
It is on.
Okay. I've been watching this really closely now for about 2.5 years in particular. And I've been watching the growth through work that is being done by the U.S. Census Bureau. They put out something on a regular basis called the Household Pulse Survey. Started out as a weekly effort, that went to bi-weekly, and then eventually monthly, and it's continuing to be done. They're up to their 54th survey just since, I think it was May of 2020. And when it first began, we had seen for several years the homeschooling rates run around 3%. But it had actually been dropping a little bit since 2012, according to the federal statistics. It had gone from like 3.2 down to like 2.9 and then 2.8 in 2019. Then the pandemic hits, and initially a lot of the work that the Household Pulse Survey came up with, their measurements of homeschooling were inflated a bit, and they determined why later, and they made adjustments. But the homeschool rate eventually made it up to about between 11 and 12%, by about 2021 in the spring. Then it went up, or then it tapered off when schools started opening, but not very much. But it did drop. And now, all year this year, it has been running steady at around 8% every month. So since August, it's just, and when I say 8%, I'm talking about 8% of the U.S. households with school-aged children have at least one homeschool child in them. So that's about between 2.6 and 2.7 million homes. So they have at least one, and about 35 to 45% of those 2.6 or 7 million homes each month, about anywhere between 30 and 45% of those have two or more. So when you begin to calculate all that out, it comes out to, it looks like there's about 3.8 or 3.9 million kids at a minimum. And I say at a minimum because, when you look at their tables of data, it comes out to where, you can see every single survey that comes back to them. And these homeschooling households are reporting either one or two children, but never more than that. And that's the reason is that they top code everything at 2. So a family might have 5 or 6 or 7 kids that are being homeschooled, and all we'll see is a 2. And that still brings that number up to about 3.8 or 3.9 million. So it's not, this year, like I said, it's running steady, even though all the schools are back open and that type of thing. So I don't think it's gonna return to anywhere close to where it was, not for a long time coming.
Well, and I could chime in from Memoria Academy. We're an online school, but our students are technically homeschoolers. And I took over February 2020. I didn't know what was about to hit me. And in a year and a half, we doubled our student population. And then we had about a year of plateau. And now with next year's registration, we can already tell we're increasing again. So with the ginormous growth, there was a plateau for a minute, and now up we go again. It's just nonstop. And that's sort of in the classical sector. And then from sort of the press side, where we're publishing curriculum materials for homeschoolers, it's been the same thing prior to COVID, consistent growth, and it was everything we could do to keep inventory on our shelves once COVID hit, when people realized that they needed a different option for their children.
Well, I think the reason homeschooling exploded wasn't because the schools closed. That's not why. It's because parents finally got to see what the schools were actually teaching. Right, so I live in Northern Virginia, Fairfax County, Loudoun County is right next door. I mean, it's insane. They're basically just teaching kids to hate each other on the basis of, accidental characteristics of their person, and to hate America. I mean, no parent, Democrat or Republican, is in favor of that. And so as soon as the schoolhouse was brought into their house, right, and they were able to see, that's why they're checking out. That's why they're going to classical academies. That's why school choice is so important.
Right, the doors to the school were brought open because the schools decided we were going to do this in your home.
Yeah, exactly.
Such a perfect segue. Leads right into my next question. And I'm making an assumption here, but I believe that many of us in this room might agree that education is at the root of most, if not all, our societal problems. The good news is that I do believe, and I think most people here also agree, that we're in the midst of an educational revolution. We know it. A lot of people out there don't know it yet, but they will very soon. The pandemic has awakened parents to demand curriculum transparency and better educational options for their children. Many parents have pulled their children out of their public district school in search of something better. So I found on EdChoice the levels of public optimism are at an all-time low for public education. Only 23%, which I still think is a little high, 23% of adults nationwide think it's going in the right direction. In 2010, when I started homeschooling my kids, we called the outsourcing options, we called them co-ops, and that's where we paid for classes a la carte. For example, I didn't want to do dissections at home, so off we went to the local co-op. So now we are seeing an influx of alternatives such as learning pods and hybrid schools and micro schools. And so from that same EdChoice survey, 44% of parents said that they either have one child enrolled in a micro school or they wish to learn more about micro schools. So do you think that all of these alternatives are a step in the right direction in terms of education freedom? And how much does curriculum matter? So it's kind of like two questions. Yes, we see that parents want alternatives. They're leaving the district school system and they're going to these alternative schools and we're just seeing an explosion in them. But my question is, that's great, yes, but also how important is curriculum?
Well, it's fantastic that they're exercising choice. I think curriculum is critical, right? The root of all of our problems. So I'm going to agree with you here.
Thank you.
Although I'll qualify it just a little bit, I would say it's miseducation, right? The root of all of our problems is miseducation. And, curriculum is what you teach. Right, so it matters a lot if you're having them read the great texts of the tradition, becoming civilizationally literate, coming to understand, the ideational, the values, the principles that inspired the regime that we live in, that form the society, that allows us to live together peacefully and prosperously. So curriculum is absolutely critical. There are always going to be parents that make terrible choices because they don't actually recognize what is good. But thankfully, because of the things like CLT, actually, where you get objective, not values-based proof of the education that a classical curriculum delivers. Parents do want what's best for their kids. And so, when classical education is competing against public education on its merits, it's inevitable that it's going to win. It's going to be attractive. One quick thing, the 23% of adults, how many of those have kids?
I think I have to go back to the study, but I believe they were all parents.
That's high then.
I would like to agree that choice is good. My wife and I we had a couple of foster children, and per the state regulation, they had to go to public school. And that's a miserable place to be when you know there are options, but those options aren't available to you as an adult who's entrusted with those children. Also, you talked about the rise of microschooling and hybrid schooling, and when I was homeschooled through about fifth grade, I was already going to a program that was 1 day a week. For homeschoolers, these things have been around for a very, very long time, and it's just now enough people in the population are talking about it that we realize this is happening. And there was one year after my mother decided she taught us everything she knew, and she sent us to a private school, and then the next year, she decided to help a lady start a school, and here I was. I thought Chris's question about the one-room schoolhouse was great. I've been in a two-room schoolhouse where, we were third to seventh grade all in one room. But that was billed as a private school, right? But it worked, and that gives parents choices. But also, for a parent to decide, we're going to do this, we're going to step out and I'm going to, I'm homeschooling my few kids and I'm going to have 4 other families join me. Deciding what to teach is daunting, right? Classical education is a very, very wide, broad idea, right? Are we going to teach Anna Karenina, or are we going to teach the Count of Monte Cristo? That's an argument that we have in the office all the time because I think the Count of Monte Cristo is the best novel ever written, and I lose that battle. But that's something that parents have to wrestle with. And so, the variety of classical curriculum options that are out there, I think is providing the opportunity for people to jump in and say, we're going to do this with 4 families because we already have a curriculum set that we can run with.
So what I'm hearing is that the classical education approach is better than the traditional homeschooling approach.
I think as a benefit of a classical education approach, I would have to say yes. As a beneficiary of it, it was wonderful.
Do you think all students could benefit from a classical liberal arts education?
If classical education is about forming a whole person, helping them reach their full potential, then yes, absolutely. Everybody can benefit.
Okay. Did you want to say something?
I just want to add that, the idea of the big push to homeschool over the last few years. Yes, that has occurred, and it doesn't look like it's going to be going away anytime soon, if ever. But there were always positive reasons that drove some families to homeschool. But there were also negative ones that were always there that they were trying to get away from. And it might be a lack of safety at the local school. It might be the curriculum that they disagreed with. But I just think that is the negative pressure now to leave the public school system has just become so much greater that I think that is leading to a lot of the decisions, that parents are making to homeschool their children. And I don't think it's going to go back ever. We've seen that, they talk about, yes, at least doubled, but I bet it has at least tripled at this point in time, the number of homeschoolers out there across the country. And we may even see more in the years to come. We'll just have to see where this takes us.
Well, and I think the growth of those numbers allows more institutions and more groups to evolve that help those homeschoolers be more successful and stick with it longer.
I agree.
A whole market base of classical liberal arts education? Love it. Okay, so let's shift gears just a little bit. I want to talk about classical charter schools. Do you think that students who attend a classical charter school gets the same high quality education as somebody who went to, say, a private or did it through homeschooling?
Well, I think it would depend on which school, right? Every single school is going to deliver at a different level, and it's not necessarily dependent on the type of school that it is.
You're going to talk about your favorites?
I don't have any.
I don't believe you.
I agree with you, Murray. I mean, not every homeschooler is created equal. Not every private school is created equal. Not every charter school is, and every school has its own mission, right? And group that it's going to minister to, and so. But again, everybody, I believe, is created with their own God-given potential, and so the question is, how far can we get them to reach that? And if a charter school is getting them as close as possible to that, then hats off to them. That's phenomenal.
You know, and when you talk about making choices between the different types of options that are out there anymore, to me it doesn't matter particularly which setting they're in. My background being school psychology, I always had a heart for the kids who really struggled. And one of the reasons, though, that they struggle in a setting where there's maybe just a normal-sized classroom population, 20, 25, and that type of thing. A lot of times the kids, especially when it comes to the development of basic skills, they have a lot of times very few opportunities to engage in the very kinds of practice behaviors that they need to engage in order for those basic skills to grow. And what I mean by that is, say for example, you're talking about one of the things that I used to do when I'd go into whether it be a normal classroom, special ed classroom, I've done this in homeschools, I go in and try to get a measure of the level of active academic engagement that goes on during instruction. And typically, what will happen, almost always, the smaller the group, the higher the kids will be academically engaged. And a high level of academic engagement is just really strategic. It's critical for a very young child's basic academic skills to develop, like reading and math calculation and spelling and that type of thing. The more practice they get, the better. And a lot of times in larger groups, they can't get that practice because it has to be spread out too much. There's exercises, there's not programs, but approaches and that type of thing that will increase academic engagements, even in good-sized groups, but the teacher has to use them. And that almost automatically occurs in a homeschool, just because most of the time, there might be 2, 3, 4 kids involved.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I've actually witnessed issues. My niece goes to one of the Barney charter schools, Northwest Classical Academy, and she was kind of homeschooled from a very young age, and then they decided to try this school, and although they love the curriculum, the problem is children learn at different rates, so she's getting very bored. It moves very slowly because they don't have gifted, they don't have honors, they don't do that in those schools, so that's one of the differences I've noticed. So we've all basically agreed classical liberal arts education is the best. So since only a very, very small portion of K-12 students have the opportunity to use this kind of a curriculum and have this high quality education, what are we doing to let others know about it? Most people don't know about it. Most parents don't know about it. Like we said earlier, parents don't even realize what the classical charter school is. It doesn't really have meaning to them. So what are we doing? How do we expose more families to this approach? Are we doing enough marketing and outreach for parents and teachers?
You can always spend another dollar marketing, but what really convinces people is word of mouth. And so the more I'm a huge Wendell Berry fan, and he's got this essay called "Think Small," and he's all about you can't affect the entire world. You can only affect your small little acreage, right? As a Kentucky farmer, I have to agree with that, right? But so. What can we do? I think each one of us can create a classical community of people that really fall in love with it. What are those people going to do? Everybody talks to their friends about what education their kids are getting, and that spreads, right? But it spreads in a convincing way rather than a fad way.
Yeah, it's like a flywheel. It takes a lot to get it going, and then at some point the momentum starts helping. And, you know, I think the school shutdowns and everything, you know, that's a tipping point here, right? So more people are becoming aware because they're unsatisfied with the option that they have has been the default.
So do you think that the states that are passing legislation for universal education savings accounts, do you think in those states parents will be more encouraged to seek out these kinds of educational options?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the parents of the children who benefit from the DC school choice program, right? I mean, before that was passed, they were all denigrated as, well, I mean, they're just poor people. What do they know? They're not going to be able to find good schools. And sure enough, I mean, as soon as they had the opportunity, they found the best schools for their kids. And why? Because they're their mothers, they're their fathers, right? Like,
Yeah, that's what we do.
That's how it works. I mean, some bureaucrat's not going to do it, and he doesn't care.
You know, when you talk about marketing, you know, how great this type of education can be. To me, what sells it are the products, the kids that come out of these homes and these schools, because they are very impressive. I've had the privilege of meeting more and more of them since I've moved to Virginia about 2.5 years ago. And these kids themselves, or these young people, are really what would sell you on this form of education. Unfortunately, it'll take time because those kids have to go through the education process and then they get out there. But over time, I think it'll really sell itself just because of the students themselves.
Well, and at Memoria Academy, we've been online as an online school since 2006. We have people from all over the country, you know, and even we have people that log in from Morocco and Hong Kong to take our classes. Families, you know, in these states that are passing these universal savings accounts and things like that, there are already a significant amount of families in those states that want a classical education but just have never been able to have the opportunity. And so, you know, it's not just that they don't know about it. Maybe a lot of them know about it but haven't had the opportunity to do it. And so I think these sorts of opportunities tear down that wall.
So I'm being told we have to start audience Q&A, but we haven't even been through even half my questions.
That's because we're long-winded.
Here's your chance to give a little plug. So one of the questions that CLT wanted me to ask, I have to ask. What are some of the new resources, tools, curricula that support homeschool families in particular to encourage them to use a classical education, in addition to, you know, where you all represent? Can you share with the audience additional tools, maybe some newer ones that we've not yet heard of?
I would say go to your local homeschool convention because that's where they all are, right? They're all going to be there, and they're all, you know, and you're going to be able to see which one's going to fit your family the best. Because you could get lost in the world of Googling. I mean, there's so many out there that focus on certain things. I don't know, we could list them forever, but that's where I would go. Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken, the Florida Parent Educator Association meeting is going to take place in Orlando.
It's always in Orlando. Yeah. I think that's the largest one in the country. I used to go there.
15,000. End of May.
Yep.
Yeah, awesome. So I would second going to that.
Can I do one more question? Yeah. This one is very different. It's about mental health. I would love to get your opinion on the intersection of mental health and a classical liberal arts education. How can that benefit today's child? Or should I pose it to the audience?
It's a phenomenal question, and you know, with the amount of students that we that my institution serves, it is fairly regular that we will get a parent that will, and this probably is not going to go the direction you think it's going, will call us and say, my student is struggling in a mental health area precisely because of the demands being put on that child. So we can go way too far in what we are requiring of the child. And so I think it's our job in the classical movement to always help temper, right? We always our society has gone so far that we don't require anything of our kids, right? And in the classical movement, we're saying, no, our kids can achieve so much if we give them what's true, good, and beautiful. But we also have to make sure that we don't just take rigor and just crush them. And that happens. And so whenever we have that conversation with a parent, like we really try to help them learn how to scale something back and be content with teaching the principles, teaching the virtues, teaching those good things, but not enforcing the quantity of it that's gonna just overrun a child.
And I'd just like to add to that, because I think that was a good response. From the world that I lived in, work world-wise, is everything was on the normal curve. And, intellectually, ability-wise, and that type of thing, you've got 25% of the student population who's going to be below normal. And that means those kids they're going to have to be pushed a lot harder to make a lot of the gains that the higher ability kids make without much effort, or not near as much effort. And some, it's impossible for them to make. So yes, by creating those kind of demands, it really could be unhealthy for those kids, because they, some of them have disabilities. Some of them are just slower to develop than other kids the same age. And that can be unhealthy, because, they start, the self-messaging they begin to develop, it's just, I can't do this, and older brothers and sisters are so much smarter than I am, and that type of thing, and my friends are so much smarter than I am. And so, yes, it can really kind of create issues if it's pushed too hard. Fortunately, 3/4 of the kids out there could do well, and some of them could do extremely well. And so I think from that aspect, I think that was a very well put response.
Yeah, I mean, reflecting back to when I was faculty and I had, some students that never should have been admitted. I mean, just on the entrance, metrics, we knew that they had less than a 1% chance of graduating in 6 years from a regional comprehensive state university, right? So these students, they're being farmed for their dollars. But dealing with them, what I found was you set expectations high and then you be generous in your assessment. That doesn't mean that you give them A's. It doesn't mean that you don't hold them accountable, but you recognize the effort that they put in and the genuine work that was involved and the growth that those high standards can bring. And you make sure that they understand that you recognize that. That was the most powerful thing for them, was knowing that, I came in down here, but I'm up here now. It doesn't matter that all the other students are way up here. They succeeded.
I think that's very beautifully said. And since I started this on a Debbie Downer note, I'd like to say I think there's a lot in classical education. We're talking about what is justice, what is goodness, what does it mean that something's beautiful? We are constantly uplifting the student. So we have to walk this balance between what we're demanding of them, but we're also presenting to them those things that are uplifting to the human spirit. And I think that does a lot to help a student grow up to be a mature, healthy adult.
It does everything for their self-esteem. I watched it with my own kids because they compared themselves to themselves. They learn differently at different pace, so it's very individualized and custom per child, the way it should be. Okay, at this point, we'd like to open up to the audience. If you have any questions, just raise your hand and a mic will come to you, is what I'm told. Here it comes.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. All right. I believe that one of the reasons for students being low achievers starts in the home. These are students that were not read to, do not have the availability of books, of teaching by the parents because the parents themselves have learning problems. How do you deal with a student that has that kind of background?
Well, I tell you what, I think homeschooling, if you've got a parent that comes from that background, but they are determined to give their child something better and so that they can achieve more in life. Homeschooling to me is a good way to go, especially at first. Because again, you're dealing with very small groups, and if they'll do things on a regularly scheduled basis, if they'll really kind of push their child will do so much better than probably the parent was able to. But you must understand also, sometimes the kids inherit certain characteristics from parents. If you've got a low-functioning parent, you may end up with low-functioning kids too that may just have the same struggles forever. Some will be able to overcome the hurdles in life. And I'm just saying this from the standpoint of I've seen some tremendous efforts in kids make outstanding progress. And case in point, I'll try to tell you this story as fast as I can. I had a little third grade boy who was raised by parents. The boy had learning disabilities, severe, and the parents did too, especially the dad. The dad was a non-reader at 30. Mom, though, she was bound and determined. She pulled her kids out of this boy out of a good school system, a very good school system, and decided to homeschool him. And so the first time I met this family was when this little boy was a third grader. And she'd been homeschooling him since the end of, he had to repeat kindergarten in this very fine school system. But she homeschools him for the first and second grade, and I picked him up as a beginning third grader. It was the first time. And all of a sudden, instead of, he had been up here intellectually as a kindergarten kid and way down low in all areas of achievement across the board. And so the school system had made the recommendation that this child be put in a special program, kind of a high intensive training school there in the Overland Park, Kansas area. But the mother avoided doing that. She decides to go homeschool. So anyway, as a beginning third grader, I worked with this kid, and now I'm only a public school employee. I'd put my students in some good programs too. But over this 2-year period, now the boy was up here in reading, and he was up there in writing, and he was up close to normal in math. And the first time I see these, I see my own results, and I'm thinking, ooh, I must have made a mistake. I better go back and do all my adding and subtracting again and checking things out. But no, I hadn't made a mistake. But I asked her, I said, what did you do? Now, she's a very shy, timid woman, and I could tell I really made her uncomfortable. When I asked her like that, it's just like, and I said, no, you don't understand. He's made a tremendous amount of progress. What have you been doing? And in reading, for example. And she said, well, I didn't know what else to do. So we would just sit on the couch every night for 30 minutes, and he would read a sentence or a paragraph to me. I'd read a sentence, a paragraph to him. Back and forth and back and forth. A child is just not going to get that kind of practice even in a special ed setting most of the time. And so, yes, there is some hope, but it's intensive. It's intensive education for the child. And I did find out years later he graduated from high school and that type of thing. And the mom eventually put him back into school, but not until he was equipped to go back. So, yeah, some kids will make even though the parents struggled, they didn't get out of high school, he did. And so it's very possible.
So I think we have time for one more quick question. Anyone have a quick question? Okay.
I'm kind of piggybacking on that. Our culture has changed homeschool mom who homeschooled, I'm a homeschool mom who homeschooled for 27 years, but I'm done now. And the moms that are homeschooling now are in a different culture. And so in our homeschool group, we're attempting to help and mentor those moms by having them stay on campus, reading Abolition of Man together and doing things to help equip them. But one of the things that's difficult for us to manage is their home life. Family formation is not as solid as it used to be. And we see a lot of marital issues or family issues, families that are blended families, all kinds of issues from that perspective. Is there a way that the homeschooling co-ops and hybrid schools can support the family better?
Anyone want to respond to that one?
I would just say the very fact that co-op exists is already a tremendous support, right? Because it's creating outside community for that family, right? But you can do simple things that may trigger a light bulb in the parents' minds that, ooh, I could do this better at home, like a manner of the week, right? And when you're sending home, this is one thing we're going to work on. That is not an intellectual skill. It's not an academic skill, right? But we're going to teach everybody that in the lunchroom, at the co-op, we're going to chew with our mouth closed out of respect for one another. Okay, right? And you send that home to your parents, and all of a sudden, you start forming that family dynamic a little bit with simple things like that. And you could do 2 or 3 things, and that could vastly change the family's culture. Sorry, I'm going to be quick, but Oscar, I don't know where Oscar went, but he was telling me he decided to fight one battle at his school this year, and he's at a full-time private high school, which was no cell phones. And the families got really mad at him, and within 2 months, he had people coming to him saying, we now have conversations at dinner, right? My kids now talk to me again. And so, those sorts of decisions at the co-op will impact the family.
Have you seen the basket at Chick-fil-A? When you put all your cell phones in the basket, they bring you ice cream for the whole family. Some Chick-fil-A's do it. Anyway, let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you so much for joining.